How is it possible that a student famously dismissed by some of his tutors as lazy, an undergraduate who notoriously boasted about studying perhaps only 1 hour a day, could fundamentally transform our entire understanding of the cosmos? This is the central paradox of Stephen Hawking, a man whose early academic life showed almost no conventional signs of the colossal intellect that would later redefine the boundaries of theoretical physics. His journey from a relaxed, almost indifferent student at Oxford to becoming the most recognizable and revered scientific mind since Albert Einstein is a profound story of latent genius, unimaginable adversity, and the sheer indomitable power of human curiosity. We will explore the life of a man who was given 2 years to live, but lived for 55 more, a mind that roamed the universe, while his body was confined to a single chair, and how this seemingly unmotivated youth became one of the greatest minds in all of human history. Born in Oxford, England, on January 8, 1942, exactly 300 years to the day after the death of Galileo Stephen William, Hawking was thrust into a world of intellectual pursuit from his very beginning. His family was highly intelligent, albeit notably eccentric. Meals were often spent with each member silently reading a book. His father, a respected medical researcher, desperately wanted his son to follow him into medicine, a path Stephen found utterly unappealing, preferring the precision of mathematics and physics. Despite his clear intellectual spark, his early schoolwork at St. Albans School was respectable but far from spectacular. In fact, he ranked in the middle of his class, yet his peers and some teachers sensed something different, nicknaming him Einstein. This intuition was confirmed when he arrived at University College, Oxford. His tutors, while frustrated by his profound lack of application and his visible apathy towards the prescribed curriculum, couldn't ignore the sheer power of his reasoning. One tutor, Robert Berman, later recalled that Hawking simply needed to know that something could be done, and then he could do it without looking to see how other people did it. They recognized what lay dormant, a first-class mind that was simply bored, waiting for a challenge worthy of its time. Upon entering Oxford at the young age of 17, Hawking was confronted with an academic environment that he found deeply underwhelming. He would later estimate that he averaged only an hour of work per day, famously stating that the physics curriculum seemed ridiculously easy. He felt no need to diligently attend lectures or painstakingly solve problem sets, as he could apparently absorb the core concepts almost by osmosis, often arriving at solutions through pure intuition rather than laborious calculation. With this abundance of free time, he threw himself into the quintessential Oxford social experience. He was far from a recluse. He was witty, opinionated, and desperate for a sense of belonging. He found this camaraderie not in the physics lab, but on the river. He joined the University College Boat Club, becoming a coxswain. His slight build made him unsuitable for rowing, but his assertive, daredevil coxing style made him a central figure in the team, navigating the boat through perilous turns and motivating his crew. This period was defined by classical music, science fiction, and lively debates with friends, stark contrast to the diligent, focused study expected of a future scientific legend. This idyllic, if academically unfocused, chapter at Oxford could not last forever. Having coasted to a first-class honors degree, a result he secured only by promising his examiners that if they gave him a first, he would go to Cambridge, and if they gave him a second, he would stay at Oxford, a clever gamble on their desire to be rid of him. He was now set to leave his undergraduate comfort zone. The question that hung in the air was profound. What happens when a mind of this caliber, a genius so unfocused and coasting on raw ability, is finally forced to confront two things simultaneously? First, a genuine intellectual challenge in the form of graduate-level cosmology at the prestigious University of Cambridge, and second, an undeniable emotional force of nature. A person who would provide the stability and purpose he had so far lacked. This collision of a new environment and a new relationship would become the crucible in which the Stephen Hawking we remember was forged. In the autumn of 1962, Hawking arrived at Trinity Hall, Cambridge, to begin his PhD in cosmology. The transition was immediately jarring. He was no longer the brilliant undergraduate in a comparatively small pond. At Cambridge, he was surrounded by the sharpest minds in the world, all vying to make their mark. His assigned supervisor, Dennis Sciama, was a prominent physicist. But Hawking had hoped to work with the famous astronomer Fred Hoyle, a leading proponent of the steady-state theory of the universe. Initially, Hawking felt adrift. He found the mathematical problems in cosmology to be far more demanding than anything he had encountered at Oxford, and his lack of rigorous study habits began to show. He was, by his own admission, aimless and profoundly uncertain of his path, still searching for a specific research question that could truly ignite his passion in the vast, demanding, and highly theoretical field of cosmology. Everything in his personal and professional life crystallized at a New Year's party in 1963, shortly after his 21st birthday. It was there he met Jane Wilde, a first-year undergraduate student studying modern languages. She was a friend of his sister's, and their connection was immediate and powerful. Jane was drawn to his quirky sense of humor, his intelligence, and, as she would later describe it, his beautiful, expressive eyes. He was captivated by her sharp wit, her cheerful disposition, and her unwavering optimism. Their burgeoning romance provided a grounding force in his otherwise chaotic graduate student life, a sudden and compelling reason to find a direction and build a future. This meeting was the first of two monumental events that year that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. He was just 21 years old, a brilliant mind on the cusp of serious academic work. And for the first time, he was deeply in love. The future, which had seemed so abstract and aimless, was suddenly taking shape. He had a partner in Jane, in a field of study in cosmology that was ripe for new ideas. Life was full of exhilarating promise. It was at this precise moment of nascent hope and ambition that the first terrifying symptoms began to accelerate, and he received the medical diagnosis that would change everything. Doctors, after a series of painful and frightening tests, delivered a verdict that was less a diagnosis than a death sentence. He had 2 years to live, and the life he was just beginning to build was in all likelihood already over. The symptoms had begun subtly during his final year at Oxford: an occasional stumble, a brief slurring of words, an uncharacteristic clumsiness when tying his shoes. He had mostly ignored them, attributing them to fatigue or a lack of coordination. But at Cambridge, they worsened undeniable. He fell down a flight of stairs, and his speech became so garbled that only his close family and friends could reliably understand him. His father, a doctor, recognized the alarming pattern and insisted he undergo tests. After 2 weeks of muscle biopsies, spinal taps, and neurological examinations, the 21-year-old Hawking was given the devastating diagnosis: amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, a progressive and incurable motor neuron disease. The prognosis delivered by the medical establishment was nothing short of brutal. The doctors explained that ALS systematically attacks the motor neurons, the nerve cells in the brain, and a spinal cord that control voluntary muscle movement. Its muscles would progressively weaken, atrophy, and eventually become completely paralyzed. The disease would rob him of his ability to walk, to write, to feed himself, and eventually to breathe. His mind, they assured him, would remain untouched, a sharp, brilliant intellect trapped inside a decaying prison. The doctors were explicit. They predicted he would not live long enough to finish his PhD or see his 25th birthday. There was no treatment, no cure, and no hope. Faced with this horrific and imminent end, Hawking understandably collapsed into a profound depression. He returned to his rooms at Cambridge, locked himself away, and listened to the tragic, epic operas of Wagner. He saw absolutely no point in continuing his research. If he was going to die in 2 years, why bother starting a PhD that took at least 3? The universe he so desperately wanted to study, with its infinite expanse and grand, sweeping laws, seemed to be mocking him. His own personal universe was rapidly contracting, closing in on him with terrifying speed, and he felt utterly hopeless, adrift in a sea of cosmic indifference and fatalistic despair. His body was indeed beginning to fail him, the inexorable march of the disease becoming more apparent with each passing month. He was forced to begin using a cane, and his speech grew increasingly difficult. But as the physical scaffolding began to crumble, the intellectual engine within him was, against all odds, just getting started. 2 critical factors intervened to pull him from the brink of despair. One was the steadfast loyalty of his supervisor, Dennis Sciama, who encouraged him to continue his work. The other, and by far the most powerful, was his relationship with Jane Wilde. It was this human connection that would provide the fuel for his scientific revolution. The engagement to Jane Wilde in 1964 was the definitive turning point. Jane, fully aware of the grim diagnosis and the 2-year prognosis, chose to marry him anyway, a profound act of love and faith that provided him with something the doctors could not, a reason to live. He later said that this engagement gave me something to live for. Suddenly, his life had a tangible purpose beyond abstract equations. If he was to get married and support a family, he needed a job. To get a job, he needed to finish his PhD. This simple domestic imperative was the spark that lit the fire of his genius. He threw himself into his work with a newfound, desperate focus. Determined to achieve something meaningful in the short time he believed he had left. Miraculously, the grim timeline set by his doctors proved incorrect. While the amyotrophic lateral sclerosis was undeniably progressing, it was doing so at a much slower rate than the aggressive form that typically claims its victims within 2 to 5 years. Its unexpected reprieve was not a cure, but it was something even more valuable. It was time, a precious, unlooked-for gift, combined with the profound new responsibilities of his marriage to Jane in 1965, and the birth of their first child, Robert, acted as a powerful accelerant. The apathy that defined his Oxford years evaporated completely, replaced by an astonishing, almost ferocious urgency. He was acutely aware that his body was a ticking clock. He didn't know if he would have weeks, months, or years before he lost the ability to write, to speak, or even to think. This existential deadline galvanized him, transforming his research from a mere academic exercise into a desperate race against his own physical decay, a sprint to unlock as many of the universe's secrets as he possibly could while he still had the chance. With his mind now fully engaged, Hawking turned his attention to the single biggest question in all of cosmology. Where did the universe come from? The prevailing Big Bang theory, which had grown out of Einstein's general relativity, suggested the universe had expanded from an incredibly hot, dense state. But what was that state exactly? What did the beginning truly look like? Hawking began to ponder a radical idea. What if the entire universe, with all its galaxies, stars, and all of time itself burst forth from a single, infinitely dense, infinitely small point of concept known as a singularity? This was not a question he could answer alone. He began an intense and fruitful collaboration with the brilliant mathematician and physicist Roger Penrose. Ress was already doing groundbreaking work on black holes, which were then still largely theoretical objects. Penrose had used novel mathematical techniques to prove that, according to Einstein's theories, any star massive enough that collapsed under its own gravity would inevitably form a singularity, a point of infinite density at its core, where the laws of physics break down. Hawking and Penrose were now tackling the biggest question of all, applying this same logic not just to a single star, but to the entire cosmos. Did the universe itself have a beginning? And if so, what was it? Hawking had a moment of profound insight. He realized he could take Penrose's mathematical framework, which described the gravitational collapse of a star inward to form a black hole singularity, and mathematically reverse it. If he ran the film of the universe's expansion backwards, what would he find? Applying Penrose's powerful theorems about black holes to the entire expanding universe, Hawking proved that if Einstein's theory of general relativity was correct, then the universe must have begun as a singularity. It wasn't just a possibility. It was a mathematical necessity. Their joint work, published in 1970, provided the most powerful mathematical argument to date that the universe and time itself had a definite beginning. The implications of this work were staggering. Hawking's singularity theorems didn't just add support to the existing Big Bang model. They fundamentally broke classical physics. They demonstrated with mathematical precision the exact point where Einstein's cherished theory of general relativity, the most successful theory of gravity ever devised, failed completely. At this initial singularity, this beginning of time and space, the density and curvature of space-time become infinite, and all the known laws of physics, including Einstein's, cease to have any meaning. The equations simply return gibberish. The singularity theorems created a profound crisis in physics. By proving that there was a beginning where physics broke down, Hawking and Penrose had thrown down a gauntlet. It was no longer possible to ignore this uncomfortable day zero of the cosmos. If classical physics failed at the origin of the universe, it meant that Einstein's theory was not the final word. It was an incomplete picture, and a new theory was desperately needed to describe these extreme conditions. To explain what really happened at the moment of creation, and to replace the nonsensical infinity with a coherent physical description. This crisis forced a new, radical direction for theoretical physics. To understand the origin of the universe, it became clear that physics needed to achieve its holy grail, the unification of its two great pillar theories. The first is general relativity, Einstein's theory of the very large, which governs gravity, planets, stars, and the expansion of the cosmos. The second is quantum mechanics, the bizarre and probabilistic theory of the very small, which governs atoms, electrons, and the subatomic world. These two theories are spectacularly successful in their own domains, but are fundamentally incompatible. Having established the origin of the universe, Hawking's restless mind turned to the other great location of singularities, black holes. At this time, black holes were still exotic, theoretical oddities. They were conceived as the universe's ultimate prisons, cosmic vacuum cleaners. Their gravity was thought to be so immense that once anything crossed their event horizon, the point of no return, it was trapped forever. Nothing, not even a particle of light, could escape. They were seen as eternal, unchanging, and most importantly, black. But Hawking, now armed with the need to combine relativity and quantum mechanics, began to question this absolute certainty. The accepted rule for black holes, famously summarized by physicist John Wheeler, was that a black hole has no hair. This enigmatic phrase meant that black holes were incredibly simple objects, completely defined by only three properties: their mass, their electric charge, and their angular momentum spin. Any other information about the objects that had fallen into them, whether they were made of stars, spaceships, or encyclopedias, was thought to be lost forever, completely erased from the universe. This information loss was a deeply troubling idea, but it was the standard, accepted view of the time. The first crack in this dogma came not from Hawking but from a graduate student at Princeton named Jacob Bekenstein. He proposed a radical, almost heretical idea, suggested that when an object falls into a black hole, its information is destroyed, but is instead encoded on the surface area of the black hole's event horizon. He further proposed that this surface area was a direct measure of the black hole's entropy, or its information content. Hawking, upon hearing this, was initially outraged. He thought the idea was absurd. If a black hole had entropy, it must also have a temperature, and if it has a temperature, it must radiate heat. But everyone knew that nothing could escape a black hole. Hawking set out to mathematically prove Bekenstein wrong. This line of inquiry led Hawking to ask one of the most profound questions of his career. What if black holes are unperfectly, eternally black after all? What if, when you introduce the strange rules of the quantum world to the edge of a black hole, something new and unexpected happens? What if over eons, they aren't just cosmic prisons, but they actually glow? This question, born from his desire to disprove Bekenstein, would lead him directly to his single greatest scientific discovery. A discovery that would link thermodynamics, general relativity, and quantum mechanics for the first time. In 1974, in a desperate attempt to disprove Bekenstein's theory, Hawking began applying the complex mathematics of quantum mechanics to the space just outside a black hole's event horizon. He was trying to show that Bekenstein's entropy idea was a mathematical flaw. Instead, to his utter astonishment and initial disbelief, his own calculations proved the exact opposite. He found that Bekenstein was, in a fundamental way, correct. This process of attempting to debunk another's theory led him to a shocking, revolutionary discovery that would forever change our understanding of these cosmic monsters and cement his name in the annals of physics. The results of his calculations were, in his own words, a complete shock. He discovered that, due to the bizarre and counterintuitive laws of quantum mechanics operating near the extreme gravitational field of the event horizon, how black holes must emit radiation. This phenomenon, later dubbed Hawking radiation, arises from virtual particle pairs, a particle and its antiparticle that constantly pop into and out of existence throughout space. Ordinarily, they annihilate each other instantly. But at the edge of a black hole, it's possible for one particle to fall in, while the other escapes, carrying energy away. To an outside observer, this escaping particle appears to be radiation emitted directly from the black hole. This meant black holes were not, in fact, truly black. They have a temperature, they glow faintly, and most importantly, they lose mass. This process is incredibly slow for large black holes, but it implies that over unfathomably long timescales, billions upon billions of years, a black hole will eventually radiate away all of its mass, and in a final flash of gamma rays, evaporate completely. Hawking's discovery of evaporating black holes was a triumphant moment, a masterpiece of theoretical physics that linked three different fields of science. However, this brilliant solution immediately created an even bigger, more profound problem. If a black hole can evaporate and disappear completely, what happens to all the information that fell into it? The encyclopedia, the spaceship, the star-all, the intricate data about what those things were. Where does it go when the black hole is gone? Hawking's theory seemed to imply that the information was simply erased from existence, a conclusion that struck at the very heart of physics. This was a terrifying prospect because quantum physics has one absolutely sacred ironclad rule: information can never ever be destroyed. The universe, at a quantum level, is like a perfect archive. The information about every particle's state must be preserved. You can burn a book, but the information it contains still exists, in theory, in the precise state of the smoke, and heat. Hawking's theory, however, suggested that a black hole was the one place in the universe that could take a book, or a star, and permanently delete its fundamental information from reality. This black hole information paradox challenged the very foundation of quantum mechanics and, by extension, our entire understanding of reality. This paradox sparked what became known as the Black Hole War, a decades-long, friendly but fiercely intellectual debate between Hawking and a handful of other elite physicists, most notably Leonard Susskind and Gerard T. Hooft. Hawking, for decades, stood firm in his belief that the information was truly lost, a radical position that most of the physics community found abhorrent. Susskind and others argued passionately that the information must be preserved, that the laws of quantum mechanics must be supreme. This battle for the soul of physics pushed theorists to their absolute limits, leading to radical new concepts like the holographic principle, and eventually forcing Hawking himself to concede decades later that he had been wrong, and that information must somehow find a way to escape. By the mid-1980s, Hawking was a titan in the world of physics, a full-time professor at Cambridge holding the same prestigious Lucasian professorship once held by Isaac Newton. His theories on the origin of the universe and the nature of black holes were a sensation, but his physical condition had deteriorated profoundly. He was now confined to a wheelchair, and his speech was reduced to a nearly incomprehensible mumble that only a few of his closest intimates could decipher. But what if you possessed the most brilliant ideas in the universe, a complete, revolutionary new vision of the cosmos, but you had absolutely no way to tell anyone? This was the nightmare he was facing. In the summer of 1985, this nightmare became a terrifying reality. While on a trip to CERN, the particle physics laboratory in Geneva, Hawking, whose respiratory system was already severely compromised by his disease, contracted a severe case of pneumonia. His condition was critical. He was rushed to the hospital and placed on a ventilator, but his lungs were failing and he was choking. The doctors, seeing no hope for recovery, offered Jane Hawking the agonizing choice of turning off the life support. She refused and instead authorized an emergency, life-saving surgery. The procedure that saved his life was a tracheotomy, an incision in his windpipe that would allow him to breathe by bypassing his failing pharyngeal muscles. The operation was a success. His life was saved, but it came at a terrible, irrevocable cost. The tracheotomy tube was inserted directly through his larynx, permanently severing his vocal cords. The faint, slurred voice that he had used to dictate his theories and communicate with his family was now gone forever. He was alive, but he was completely silent, trapped inside his own body with no way to speak to the outside world. The challenge now was almost insurmountable. He was brimming with ideas and had been slowly working on a book aimed at making his complex cosmological theories accessible to the general public. But how do you write a global bestseller about the origins of time and the fate of the universe when you are almost completely paralyzed and cannot speak, write, or type? How do you explain the concept of Hawking radiation using only the twitch of a single muscle in your cheek? His communication was reduced to raising his eyebrows to signal yes or no as someone painstakingly pointed to letters on a spelling card, a method so slow it was almost useless for complex thought. Just as he seemed to be locked inside his own mind, technology offered an escape route. A Californian computer expert named Walt Waltish, whose mother-in-law also suffered from ALS, had developed an early communication program called Equalizer. He learned of Hawking's plight and offered him the program. This system, which initially ran on an Apple II computer, presented Hawking with a screen divided into rows and columns of words and letters. A cursor would scan across them, and Hawking, who still had limited use of his hands, could select a character or word by pressing a small clicker. This was painstaking. He could, at his peak, manage about 15 words per minute. But it was a lifeline. As his motor control deteriorated further, this system was adapted. Intel engineers, who would support his technology for decades, fitted a small infrared sensor to his glasses that monitored a tiny voluntary twitch in his right cheek muscle. A click was replaced by a twitch. With this single minuscule movement, he could browse the internet, write emails, compose lectures, and author entire books. This new system came with a voice, a speech synthesizer with a distinct robotic, American-sounding accent. This synthesizer, which he would use for the rest of his life, became globally iconic. It was, in a strange way, the perfect voice for him. Clear, timeless, and instantly recognizable. With this voice, he completed his masterpiece, A Brief History of Time, published in 1988. The book was an unprecedented success, spending a record-breaking 237 weeks on the bestseller list, sold millions of copies, and was translated into dozens of languages. Making complex cosmology, black holes, and the search for a unified theory accessible to millions of people around the globe, turning its author into an international superstar. The book's success transformed Hawking from a respected but relatively obscure academic into the world's most famous living scientist. But this raised an interesting question. Why did this man, the world's most serious scientist who dealt with the most profound questions of existence, become such a beloved pop culture icon, even appearing as a cartoon character? The answer lies in the unique combination of his mind, his disability, and his unexpectedly sharp sense of humor. He was the perfect, non-threatening embodiment of pure intellect, and the public adored him for it. His book's staggering popularity and his unique, synthesized voice made him a global celebrity, a status he clearly relished and embraced with a playful, mischievous spirit. He wasn't afraid to puncture his own serious image. He provided his own voice acting for his animated character on The Simpsons, where he famously told Homer, "Your theory of a donut-shaped universe is intriguing." He appeared as a hologram of himself playing poker with Einstein and Newton on Star Trek, The Next Generation, and he had a memorable, humorous encounter with Sheldon Cooper on The Big Bang Theory. These appearances weren't just novelties. They were a deliberate strategy to demystify science. Through these pop culture forays, he transcended the role of a mere scientist. He became a symbol, a global icon of human resilience, perseverance, and the limitless power of the mind. He was the living, breathing, or rather, non-breathing proof that no physical barrier could or should limit the human imagination. At a time when scientists were often portrayed as dry, socially awkward recluses, Hawking used his immense platform and his unique brand of celebrity to make physics and cosmology cool and accessible for a new generation. It's inspiring millions to wonder about the universe. As he aged, his scientific focus shifted back to the question that had started it all, the very beginning. Having established that the universe likely began in a singularity, he was still troubled by the beginning itself. What was it? And did it require a supernatural explanation? In short, did God create the universe? Or, as his work began to suggest, did the universe have the power to create itself spontaneously, from the laws of physics alone? This became the final great philosophical and scientific question of his life. Working with fellow physicist James Hartle, Hawking developed one of his most mind-bending and elegant theories. the no-boundary proposal, also known as the Hartle-Hawking state. This proposal, first put forward in 1983, suggests that the universe, when one rewinds time back to the Big Bang, does not end at a singularity, a sharp edge or beginning point. Instead, as one approaches the beginning, the nature of time itself smoothly blends with space. The universe in this model has no beginning in the traditional sense, just as a sphere like the surface of the Earth has no edge or starting point. In this no-boundary model, the universe is completely self-contained. Asking what came before the Big Bang becomes, in Hawking's famous analogy, a meaningless question, much like asking what is north of the North Pole. The concept of before ceases to exist when time itself is part of the fabric of the universe that came into being. The universe, according to this theory, simply is. It didn't need a spark to light it, because there was no time for a spark to exist in before the universe began. This no-boundary concept led Hawking to his most famous, and for many, his most controversial philosophical conclusion. In his 2010 book, The Grand Design, co-authored with Leonard Mlodinow, he laid out his case with stark clarity. If the universe is a completely self-contained system, governed by the laws of physics like in theory, a candidate for the theory of everything, and if it can spontaneously create itself from nothing as quantum mechanics allows, then the role of a prime mover, a divine creator, becomes superfluous. He argued that because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. This wasn't necessarily an atheistic statement intended to disprove the existence of a deity, but rather a scientific one. The laws of physics themselves, he contended, are sufficient to explain the existence of the universe and everything in it. For a cosmos without a beginning, there is no need for a beginner. This assertion placed him directly in the crosshairs of centuries of religious and philosophical debate, a position he never shied away from. In his final decades, the man who had dedicated his life to understanding the grandest personal laws of the universe became increasingly and deeply worried about the future of our own small, fragile planet. His perspective, which spanned cosmic eons, gave him a unique and terrifying insight into the dangers facing humanity. What did this mind, which saw the birth and death of stars, see in our immediate future that the rest of us do not? He felt a moral obligation to use his famous voice to sound the alarm. In his later years, Hawking issued a series of stark and specific warnings about existential threats. He was particularly concerned about the rapid development of unfettered artificial intelligence. While he used a simple form of AI to help him communicate, he feared that a true general AI could rapidly improve itself, surpassing human intelligence at an exponential rate. Such a superintelligence, he warned, could be the best or the worst thing ever to happen to humanity. And if we were not careful, it could see humanity as an obstacle to its own goals and replace us entirely. His warnings were not limited to futuristic technology. He also spoke out with increasing urgency about the immediate self-inflicted threats we were ignoring. He warned that climate change, if left unchecked, could push Earth to a tipping point, turning our planet into a hothouse wasteland like Venus. He warned about the lingering, catastrophic danger of nuclear war, the terrifying new possibilities of genetically engineered viruses, stating that our greatest threats now come not from nature, but from ourselves and our own unchecked technological advancements. His solution to these mounting threats was as radical and ambitious as his cosmology. He argued that humanity's long-term survival was too precious to be risked on a single vulnerable planet. His ultimate solution was for humanity to become a multiplanetary species. We must spread out to the stars, colonizing the Moon, Mars, and eventually other star systems. This, he believed, was the only way to ensure the long-term survival of our species, creating a cosmic insurance policy against our own self-destructive tendencies and the inevitable dangers of a dynamic universe. His body, by this point, was almost completely still, confined to a high-tech wheelchair, his every need tended to by a team of nurses. He could only communicate by twitching his cheek. And yet this profound physical confinement only seemed to amplify the power of his intellectual freedom. While his body was a prisoner of physics, his mind roamed the cosmos freely. From the first femtosecond of the Big Bang to the final, slow evaporation of the last black hole. What, then, is the final legacy of this extraordinary paradox of a man? He died peacefully at his home in Cambridge on March 14, 2018, at the age of 76. In a final poetic coincidence, this date was Pi Day 3/14 and the anniversary of Albert Einstein's birth. He had defied his original 2-year prognosis by more than half a century, a medical and human miracle. His global stature was so immense that his ashes were given one of the highest honors in the nation. They were interred at Westminster Abbey. In the heart of London, his final resting place placed neatly between the tombs of Sir Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin. Joining the pantheon of the greatest scientific minds Britain has ever produced, his intellectual work continued until the very end. His final scientific paper, submitted just days before his death, was a characteristically ambitious attempt to explore the information paradox and the possibility of a multiverse. The idea that our universe is just one of many was a testament to a mind that never, ever stopped questioning, probing, and exploring. His quest for answers, the same curiosity that had defined him as a boy, never stopped, even as his body failed him completely. In the end, Stephen Hawking's legacy is twofold, a duality as profound as the wave-particle nature of light. Scientifically, he taught us to view the universe as a far more bizarre, complex, and wondrous place than we ever imagined, a place where black holes aren't black, where information is a sacred commodity, and where the universe itself may have simply willed itself into being without a creator. But his human legacy is perhaps even greater, demonstrated, more powerfully than any other figure in modern history, that the limitations of the physical body have no bearing on the limitless potential of the human mind and the infinite power of the human spirit. He embodied the very essence of curiosity. He taught us, in his own iconic words, a simple but profound lesson for all of humanity. Remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. Try to make sense of what you see and wonder about what makes the universe exist. Be curious. And however difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at. It matters that you don't just give up.